Buonasera Luciano. Ci vorrebbe uno pratico qua questo microfono. Comunque va bene.
Good evening, Luciano.
Cerco di farmi sentire.
I'll try and raise my voice so you can hear me. On the eve of this game, you said, I need to see where we're at in terms of these top sides. There was a fairly clear verdict out there tonight in terms of the performance and the result, but ultimately it feels like you need to convince them, if they are to be convinced, that you need to press ahead with the route you've gone down. There are no doubts about that whatsoever. It becomes quite easy to convince the players. We probably didn't recover very well in terms of just how demanding and important the tournament was itself, because there was too much of a gulf in terms of sharpness and freshness. You can't necessarily talk about anything else. That's right at the basis of everything. If you don't have the same stamina as the opposition, then of course you can't do things with the same reactiveness, the same speed of reaction. So, if you are struggling physically and you come up against a team that is so technical like they are, then you start to lose those cool heads. And as a result, you're not able to react. Ultimately, that's right at the heart of the issue. That's what was highlighted tonight. Leaving aside any technical ability in terms of Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal, who have extraordinary pace, but in general terms, how quick we were to react compared with them there was a big difference in that. And that means that therefore you do struggle when they counter-press you. It then means that you make mistakes with countless passes. But it's the same common denominator. Basically, how fresh you are. The television also really highlighted just how you lacked freshness tonight and sharpness. How do you explain that? Is it just because it was such a demanding, exhausting season in terms of the workload that you had at Coverciano before you traveled to Germany? You spoke about just how draining this is in terms of the importance of the competition itself. Could it come down to experience? Is it a psychological factor? How do you explain this difference in freshness? Oh, maybe I needed to give them more rest. I probably needed to give them more days off, because we gave them a day and a half off in terms of rest. And we saw that that was the right decision in terms of our data, in terms of monitor everything with the GPS data that we have, and so on and so forth. But there was too much of a gulf. We were constantly stretched. We were never able to squeeze the spaces between our various units, and they caused us problems. They caused us problems beyond what the scoreline suggests. Let's not beat around the bush. And when you're never able to stay compact, both in terms of when you play the ball back to the goalkeeper and then when you push forward because you're trying to play in behind the line, the fact that you play the ball forward, we did that a lot more tonight. But we were a little bit too frantic in terms of trying to launch the ball over their defensive line. We were too quick to do so because we weren't able to play compact as a team. We didn't play a fluid brand of football tonight. When we won the ball back, we struggled to keep possession. They then won the ball back and we struggled to win it back again. Every time we did then regain possession, then we ran into issues because once again we came under pressure from their counter-press. But we also made mistakes on countless numbers of passes, and you can't afford to make mistakes on passes such as those. That's also a component part this evening. That was also a factor, because we actually chose this team selection in order to actually make sure that we built out from the back and had clean ball, but we actually made mistakes on some rather simple passes.
Oh, the microphone. Can we have the microphone back? Possiamo avere il microfono, per favore?
Andrea.
Thank you.
Salve mister, buonasera. Le chiedo, questa partita lei voleva
Good evening.
il livello di quest'Italia.
You wanted to see where Italy were at tonight, and you also wanted to go toe-to-toe and compete against Spain. Watching this Spain side,
Che lei vorrebbe vedere in futuro?
is that the sort of Italy team that you'd like to see in the future, and the way that Spain played tonight? I think everyone would love to copy Spain in terms of the way they play. They're the team that have been playing best football for the longest time now. I need to try and succeed in making my peers aware of just how important this match is. Because ultimately, if you come up against teams like this, it becomes very challenging if you do just sit deep. And ultimately, then you have to completely overhaul what your concept is of the team or the mentality of the team it has. So you pick a team that simply chases after the ball, that doesn't keep possession, and you just cede the ball to the opposition. But that's not a brand of football that I like to necessarily play. So it's actually difficult for me to teach that and coach that as a result. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do that. I think I'm the least suited person to do that. So therefore, you need to try and actually play the ball and keep possession as we did in our previous two matches. And you need to try and get hold of the game and take the ball and the game by the scruff of the neck. That's the only way you can do things. That's the only way. We got stretched as a team. We weren't very reactive or responsive. We weren't capable of anticipating where we needed to take the ball. We weren't able to anticipate who was closing us down. And on that score, I actually expected us to try and do something more. But what really influenced it was the fact that we were sluggish tonight. That really is a determining factor. That's the main reason why this happened. And therefore, you need to try and sort everything out, but it's all triggered from that, the fact that we were sluggish.
Sono qui, salve mister. Allora, statisticamente è un 1-0 su autorete, ma ovviamente...
Statistically, a 1-0 defeat via an own goal is what actually came to pass, but what sort of result is this, or what result could this be in danger of becoming for your players? It's a result where the scoreline says, and the match itself says, that they're a team, and we weren't able to be a team tonight. It's a result that they deserve. They deserve to win the game, regardless of whether they won by a goal more or a goal less. They deserve to win the match tonight. And we were never in the game. Besides the final 20 minutes of the match, we were never able to create situations which would allow us to actually compete against a brand of football of this level.
Mister, buonasera. Volevo ripartire da quest'ultima cosa che poi
I wanted to come back to what you just said, and maybe that's what you want to start again with. In the last few minutes, the team looked a bit more clinical, determined, brave. Spain dropped off and Italy actually did something. You actually got a few balls into the box. So maybe it's not only a case of sluggishness or freshness, because in the final minutes of the game, you certainly weren't fresh. So maybe it comes down to certain players that might have disappointed you more than others, that did less than others. The forwards didn't offer a great deal in the opening 45 minutes. No, that's all a consequence of everything else. Naturally, if a number of players aren't at the top of their game, then it becomes doubly difficult, because they're able to actually seize space even when you're playing at the peak of your powers as a team. Whereas if a couple of players are not necessarily in the game whatsoever, then of course Spain could completely dominate proceedings and do so quite comfortably. It was very clear that it came down to the entire team. You know, 2 or 3 individuals might have not necessarily been up to scratch. That was the case. A number of players weren't at the top of their game tonight as a team. And if you were to actually analyze things individually, but when we tried to actually play the game, we were always quite slow in terms of our reaction times. It took too long. And Matteo Retegui and Giacomo Raspadori were fresh. They actually pressed a bit more aggressively towards the end. And therefore, we had the opportunity to win the ball a little bit higher up the pitch. And we were therefore able to play a bit more in the opposition half of the pitch. But it's all comes down to that. Perhaps I should have changed something in terms of what we saw tonight. There's no point beating around the bush. But it didn't come down to a couple of players. When there are 4 or 5 players who are fresher out there, you could see that we were able to actually cause more problems for Spain. Good evening. I wanted to ask you, in terms of the difference in terms of fitness levels and reaction time, I wanted to know whether some of your players hadn't necessarily recovered compared with 4 or 5 days ago. Is there a difference in terms of some players are actually quicker, some of the Spanish players are actually quicker than their Italian counterparts, or were some of your players simply a bit too timid tonight? It's a bit of both. Some of the players hadn't recovered to 100% fitness. And if you're not able to take control of the game, take the game by the scruff of the neck, the difference in terms of pace for certain individual players becomes even clearer, because then you have to defend, and if you don't actually force them to run back and they're only running forward, those players that are twice as quick as yours, if you don't actually give them something to think about in terms of them occasionally having to track back and defend, where you actually expend twice as much energy, because you expend twice as much energy when you're defending in terms of the energy. If you actually have to adapt to what the opposition are dictating, you think it's the same distance you have to cover in terms of meters, but in terms of your legs and your head, it actually feels twice as taxing, twice as demanding. And therefore, the gulf becomes clearer.